Marshall Beckett pulled his truck into the elementary school pickup line, engine ticking as it cooled. The afternoon sun beat down on Brandon Falls, Georgia, turning the asphalt into waves of heat. He checked his watch 3:15 p.m. sharp. Same time every day for the past 6 years. Lana emerged from the school doors, her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Her dark hair caught the sunlight as she scanned the line of cars. When she spotted his truck, her face lit up with the kind of smile that made every hard day worth it. "Daddy!" She climbed into the passenger seat, buckling her seatbelt without being asked. "How was school, sweetheart?" "Good. Mrs. Patterson said my drawing was the best in class." She pulled out a paper with crayon marks, showing their house, 2 stick figures standing in front, one tall, one small. "Where's Mommy in the picture?" Lana's smile faded slightly. "She was taking a nap when I left for school." Marshall nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Hollis had been sleeping more lately, claiming headaches and fatigue. He started the truck and pulled out of the school lot. "What do you want for dinner?" "I picked up some chicken from the store. Can we make it with the lemon like last time?" "Sure thing." They drove through the quiet streets of Brandon Falls, past the well-maintained lawns and white picket fences that made the town look like something from postcard. Marshall had built their life here from nothing: the auto repair shop that bore his name, the modest 2-story house, the routine that kept Lana safe and fed and loved the tea home. Hollis's car sat in the driveway. Marshall frowned. She usually worked until 5 at the real estate office downtown. "Maybe Mommy's sick again," Lana said, her voice smaller now. "We'll check on her." Inside, the house felt different. Too quiet. Marshall called out as they entered through the kitchen door. "Hollis? We're home." No answer. Lana set her backpack on the counter and opened it to pull out her homework folder. Marshall walked toward the living room, noting the faint scent of cologne in the air. Not his cologne. "Hollis." She appeared at the top of the stairs, hair slightly messed, wearing a robe at 4 in the afternoon. "Oh, you're early." "Same time as always." Marshall studied her face. Pink cheeks, bright eyes. Not the look of someone who'd been napping with a headache. "I must have lost track of time." She came down the stairs, readying her robe. "How was school, baby?" Lana looked up from her homework. "Fine." The doorbell rang before anyone could say more. Marshall opened it to find Nash Redmond standing on their porch, holding a small bag from the pharmacy. "Hey, Marshall." "Brought those vitamins Hollis asked for." Nash's smile was easy, practiced. At 42, he had the kind of face people trusted: soft brown eyes, clean-shaven jaw, graying temples that made him look distinguished in his nurse scrubs. "Vitamins for her iron deficiency." "Doc still making house calls?" "Must be serious." Marshall felt something cold settle in his stomach. "There's no doctor visiting." Nash's smile froze for just a beat. His eyes flicked past Marshall toward the stairs where Hollis stood. "Oh, huh. Must have mixed you guys up with the Hendersons. They had a cardiologist come by last week." He handed Marshall the bag. "Well, these should help either way." "Thanks." Marshall's voice sounded normal, but his mind was spinning. Nash worked at the urgent care center. He knew every doctor in town. He didn't mix people up. After Nash left, Marshall found Hollis in the kitchen starting dinner. "You feeling okay?" "Nash seemed to think you had a doctor visiting." Hollis laughed, but sounded forced. "You know Nash. Always mixing things up. I told him I had a little scare with some fatigue, but it's nothing serious. Just need more iron." Marshall nodded, watching her face. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "What kind of scare?" "Just some dizziness. Low blood pressure." "It's fine, Marshall." "Really?" She turned back to the stove. Conversation closed. But Marshall had learned to notice things during his time in Iraq. The way people moved when they were hiding something. The subtle changes in voice and posture that meant danger was close. His wife was lying to him. Over the next 2 weeks, Marshall paid attention. It started small little inconsistencies that might have meant nothing individually, but formed a pattern when viewed together. The garage door opener. Marshall checked the logs on their ring system every morning, a habit from his military days. The garage had opened at 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday, while he was at the shop. When he asked Hollis about it, she said she'd come home for lunch and forgotten something. But her car had never left the real estate office. He'd driven past on his way to pick up parts. Then there were the phone calls. Hollis had always been careful about her privacy, But now she deleted her call history every night. When Marshall casually asked who kept calling, she said it was work stuff. Boring real estate contracts. The biggest change was in Lana. His daughter had always been quiet around adults, but now she seemed to shrink when Hollis entered a room. She asked to sleep in Marshall's room more often, claiming bad dreams. When he asked about the dreams, she couldn't describe them. Just scared, she would say, curling against his side. Marshall worked late Friday night, finishing up an engine rebuild for Mrs. Chen's Honda. The shop felt peaceful after hours, just him and the familiar smell of motor oil and the sound of his tools. He'd built this place from nothing after coming back from Iraq, when the nightmares made normal sleep impossible and he needed something to do with his hands. His phone buzzed. Text from Hollis. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Marshall looked at the timestamp. 9:47 p.m. Real estate offices didn't stay open past 6, that he finished his work and drove home through the empty streets. The house was dark except for Lana's night light upstairs. He checked on her fast asleep, clutching the stuffed elephant he'd brought back from overseas in their bedroom. Marshall opened his laptop and pulled up their bank statements. Everything looked normal. Bills paid on time, grocery store charges, gas station purchases. Nothing unusual. But when he dug deeper into Hollis's personal accounts, he found gaps. Transactions marked as cash withdrawals with no corresponding deposits. Small amounts, 50 here, 100 there. Easy to miss unless you were looking. Marshall closed the laptop when he heard Hollis's car in the driveway. She came upstairs quietly, moving through their bedroom in the dark. How was work? He asked. She jumped, hand her chest. God, Marshall, you scared me. Sorry. How was work? Fine. Just paperwork. You know how it is. She slipped into the bathroom without turning on the light. Marshall stared at the ceiling. In Iraq, when something felt wrong, you investigated. You didn't ignore the feeling and hope it went away. People died when you ignored your instincts, but this wasn't Iraq. This was his home, his family. Still, something was wrong. Marshall drove to Atlanta the next morning, telling Hollis he needed parts for a custom job. Instead, he met with Benny Rodriguez at a coffee shop downtown. Benny had been his communications specialist in Iraq and now ran a private security company. You want me to set up surveillance in your own house? Benny studied Marshall across the table. That's a big step, brother. Something's not right. I need to know what's happening when I'm not there. Benny nodded slowly. Your house, your call. But once you see something, you can't unsee it. I know. They drove back to Brandon Falls together. Benny installed 2 cameras while Hollis was at work and Lana was at school. One behind a vent in the hallway upstairs, positioned to catch anyone entering or leaving the master bedroom. Another tucked into the bookshelf in the living room, nearly invisible among Marshall's collection of military histories. Motion-activated, infrared-capable, wireless transmission to your phone, Benny explained. You'll get alerts in real time. That afternoon, Marshall told Hollis he'd be working late again. A rush job for the mayor's wife. Had to be done by morning. Instead, he parked 3 blocks away and monitored the camera feeds on his phone. At 7:30 p.m., the front door opened. Nash entered like he lived there. No hesitation, no knocking. Hollis greeted him in the living room, and they embraced. Not a friendly hug. A lover's embrace. Marshall's hands tightened on his phone. He'd suspected the affair, but seeing it still hit like a physical blow. 7 years of marriage. 6 years of raising Lana together. And Hollis was throwing it away for Nash Redmond. But then Lana walked into the frame. She must have heard voices and come downstairs. Nash turned toward her, and his whole demeanor changed. He crouched to her level, pulling something from his pocket, a red lollipop. Marshall watched Nash whisper something to Lana. She backed up, shaking her head. Nash kept talking, holding out the candy. Lana looked uncomfortable, glancing toward Hollis for help. Hollis said something Marshall couldn't hear from the camera's audio. Nash laughed and ruffled Lana's hair. She flinched away from his touch. Then the screen went black. Marshall stared at his phone, heart hammering. 5 seconds of nothing. When the feed returned, Nash was gone. Lana wasn't in the room. Hollis stood alone, looking toward the stairs that Marshall's breathing turned shallow. Someone had cut the camera feed. Deliberately. And during those 5 seconds, something had happened to his daughter. He drove home fast, bursting through the front door. "Where's Lana?" Hollis looked up from the couch, where she was watching television like nothing had happened. "Upstairs. Homework." Marshall took the stairs two at a time. Lana's door was closed. He knocked softly. "Come in." She sat at her desk, coloring book open, crayons scattered around her. She looked up with wide eyes. "Hi, Daddy. How are you doing, sweetheart?" "Good." But her voice was smaller than usual. Marshall noticed the red lollipop stick in her trash can. "Did someone give you candy?" Lana's crayon stopped moving. "Mommy said not to tell." "Tell what?" "About Mr. Nash visiting. She said it was a secret." Marshall knelt beside her chair. "Lana, you can tell me anything. I won't be mad." She looked toward her closed door, then back at him. "He makes me nervous." "Why?" "He asks funny questions. About my body. About if I like secrets." She colored harder, pressing the red crayon into the paper. "I don't like him." Marshall's vision went red around the edges. "What kind of questions?" "I don't want to say." Lana's eyes filled with tears. "Am I in trouble?" "No, baby. You're not in trouble." Marshall pulled her into his arms. "You're never in trouble for telling me the truth." But inside, rage was building like a storm. Marshall called his sister Saturday morning while Hollis was at the farmer's market with Lana. "I need to see you. Today." Delia Rhodes lived 3 hours away in Macon, in a small house behind a tall fence. She'd retired from a sheriff's department after 20 years and now spent her time restoring classic motorcycles. At 44, she was tougher than most men Marshall knew and had never liked Hollis. "You look like hell," she said when he arrived. Marshall showed her the camera footage on his laptop. Delia watched without speaking, her jaw getting tighter with each replay. 5 seconds blacked out, she said finally. "That's deliberate. Someone cut that feed. Look here." He moves toward the router before the blackout. She was right. In the last frame before the feed died, Nash was walking toward the corner where their Wi-Fi router Saturday. Hollis knew about the cameras. Had to. She's the one who turned off the Wi-Fi. Delia leaned back in her chair. What did Lana say? Marshall told her about the conversation, about the inappropriate questions, about Lana's fear. Delia's expression grew darker. "This isn't just an affair, Marshall. This is predatory behavior." "I know. Have you noticed any other changes in Lana? Sleep problems? Regression behaviors?" Marshall thought about the bedwetting that had started again 2 months ago. The nightmares. The way Lana had become clingy and quiet. "Yeah, all of that." Delia stood up and walked to her kitchen, returning with a beer. "We need to document everything. Patterns, timeline, evidence. Because what you're describing sounds like grooming." "Grooming? How predators prepare children for abuse. They build trust, introduce physical contact gradually, normalize inappropriate behavior. The lollipop, the secret questions, those are textbook tactics." Marshall's hands clenched into fists. "If he's touched her, we handle this the right way. Legal way. Because if you kill him, you go to prison and Lana grows up without her father." Delia was right, but every instinct Marshall had was screaming for violence. In Iraq, when someone threatened innocent people, you eliminated the threat. Clean and simple. But this wasn't Iraq. This was Brandon Falls, Georgia, and he had to think like a father, not a soldier. What do? We build a case. Document everything. Find out what else they're hiding. Delia pulled out her own laptop. Let's start with Nash's background. 20 minutes of searching revealed Nash's employment history, his nursing license, his clean record. But buried in a local Tennessee newspaper from 4 years ago, they found a small item. Local nurse Nash Redmond was cleared of charges related to inappropriate conduct with a minor patient after the family reached a private settlement with Mercy General Hospital. Marshall stared at the screen. He's done this before, and got away with it. Probably part of why he moved to Georgia. Delia printed the article. What about Hollis? Any financial irregularities? Marshall pulled up their bank statements again, but this time Delia showed him what to look for. The cash withdrawals formed a pattern always the day after Nash visited. Always in amounts just under $200. She's paying him, Delia said. Or he's paying her. Either way, money's changing hands. For what? Access to Lana. Think about it, Hollis gets Nash alone time with your daughter, and money changes hands. That's not an affair. That's a transaction. The words hit Marshall like cold water. His wife wasn't just cheating on him. She was selling access to their 6-year-old daughter. I'm going to kill them both. No, you're not. Delia's voice was calm but firm. You're going to save your daughter and put them both in prison where they belong. She was right. But as Marshall drove home that evening, he had to pull over twice to vomit from the rage churning in his stomach. Marshall waited until the following weekend to make his move. He told Hollis he was taking Lana camping a daddy-daughter weekend at Lake Sinclair. She seemed relieved, almost eager for them to leave. Have fun, she said, kissing Lana's forehead with what looked like genuine affection. Be good for Daddy. Marshall loaded camping gear into his truck, but instead of driving to the lake, he went to Delia's house. His sister had prepared the guest room for Lana and stocked the kitchen with all her favorite foods. Why aren't we at the lake? Lana asked as they carried their bags inside. Change of plans. Aunt Delia wanted to see you. That evening, after Delia had gone to bed, Marshall sat with Lana on the back porch. She was coloring in a new book while he pretended to read a magazine. Lana, can I ask you something? She looked up, crayon poised over a picture of a butterfly. That man who visits sometimes, Mr. Nash. How do you feel when he's around? Lana's hand stopped moving. She stared down at her coloring book. I don't like talking about him. I know it's hard, but I need to know because I'm your daddy and it's my job to keep you safe. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He makes me nervous. Can you tell me why? He asked me to sit on his lap when Mommy goes to the bathroom. And he touches my hair and says I'm pretty. She colored harder, pressing the crayon so hard it broke. He says little girls like me should have secrets with grown-ups. Marshall's vision went dark around the edges. What kind of secrets? About games. Special games that only we play. Lana looked up at him with frightened eyes. He said if I told, bad things would happen to you. He said you might go away. Marshall set down his magazine and pulled Lana into his lap. She curled against him like she used to when she was smaller. Lana, listen to me very carefully. No grown-up should ever ask you to keep secrets about touching or games. Ever. And nothing bad will happen to me because you told me the truth. Promise. I promise. You're the bravest girl I know, and I'm proud of you for telling me. But inside, Marshall was planning Nash Redmond's death in precise detail. Monday morning, while Lana was at school and supposedly at work, Marshall met Delia at the courthouse in Macon. She'd used her connections to pull public records on both Hollis and Nash. Found something interesting, Delia said, spreading papers across a conference table. Your wife's been busy. The first document was a life insurance policy. $400,000 on Lana's life, signed 3 months ago. Hollis had listed herself as the beneficiary and forged Marshall's signature as the secondary holder. She took out insurance on our daughter without telling me. Gets worse. Delia handed him another stack of papers. Medical records. Hollis has been taking Lana to a clinic in Atlanta, listed as pediatric neurology evaluations. Marshall scanned the invoices. Monthly visits for the past 4 months. Tests for seizure disorders, developmental delays, cognitive impairment. All paid for in cash. Lana doesn't have any of these problems. No, but if she did, she'd be more vulnerable, easier to control, and worth more dead than alive. Delia's voice was grim. Look at this. The final document was a bank statement for an account Marshall had never seen. Hollis's name only, opened 6 months ago. Regular deposits in cash, $2,000 here, $3,000 there. Total balance, $47,000. Where's this money coming from? That's what we need to find out. Delia leaned back in her chair. But I've got a theory. Nash works in urgent care. He has access to medical records, billing systems, prescription pads. He could be running any number of scams. Marshall studied the timeline. The insurance policy, the fake medical visits, the secret bank account, it all started around the same time Nash began visiting their house. This isn't random. They're planning something. Yeah, and your daughter is the target. That afternoon, Marshall called the clinic in Atlanta, pretending to be Hollis's husband concerned about their daughter's appointments. Oh yes, Mr. Beckett. Lana's neurological issues are quite complex. Dr. Patel has been very thorough with the testing. What exactly is wrong with her? Well, according to your wife, Lana has been having seizures, memory problems, behavioral regression. We've been monitoring her brain activity to determine if she might be developing early-onset epilepsy. Marshall's blood ran cold. Seizures? Mrs. Beckett has been very concerned. She mentioned that Lana sometimes forgets conversations, acts confused, has trouble walking. Very troubling symptoms for such a young child. After he hung up, Marshall sat in his truck outside Lana's school, trying to control his breathing. Hollis had been describing symptoms of brain damage or severe neurological disease, none of which Lana actually had. But if something happened to Lana, an accident, a sudden illness, the medical records would show a history of serious problems. Problems that could explain a tragic early death. And Hollis would collect $400,000. That evening, Marshall drove to the other side of town to visit Hollis's sister Marla. The two women had never gotten along, and Marla had skipped their wedding after a fight about money. Marla lived in a small apartment behind a convenience store she managed. She invited Marshall in, but looked suspicious. If you're here about borrowing money, Hollis already tried that route. I'm not here about money. I need to understand something about your sister. Marla poured herself a glass of wine and gestured for Marshall to sit on her couch. What do you want to know? Growing up, how was she with attention? With being cared for? Marla laughed bitterly. Hollis? She was Mama's little princess. At least when she was sick. What do you mean? Hollis figured out early that Mama only paid attention to her when something was wrong. So something was always wrong. Stomach aches, headaches, mysterious pains that doctors could never find. Marla took a long sip of wine. I remember one time, she convinced Mama she had appendicitis. They rushed her to the hospital, ran all kinds of tests. Nothing wrong with her. Marshall felt pieces clicking into place. Did your mother believe her? Always. Mama ate up the drama. Poor little Hollis, so sick, so fragile. Meanwhile, I was getting straight A's and working part-time jobs, and nobody noticed. Marla's voice was bitter. Hollis learned that being the victim got her love. What about when she got older? Same pattern. She'd get sick whenever boyfriends started losing interest. Mysterious illnesses that required lots of care and attention. I told you she was trouble when you started dating her. Marshall remembered. Marla had pulled him aside at a family barbecue and warned him that Hollis collected drama like some people collect stamps. He hadn't listened. There's something else, Marla said. About 5 years ago, Hollis asked me about life insurance, specifically about policies on children. Said she was worried something might happen to Lana and wanted to know how much coverage was normal. What did you tell her? That most people don't insure their kids for hundreds of thousands of dollars. That it was weird. Marla set down her wine glass. Why are you asking all this, Marshall? He told her everything. The affair, Nash's behavior with Lana, the insurance policy, the fake medical records. Marla's face grew paler with each detail. Oh my God, she's gonna hurt that little girl. I won't let that happen. You have to stop her. Whatever she's planning, you have to stop her. Marla grabbed his arm. Hollis doesn't care about anyone but herself. She never has. And if she thinks Lana is worth more dead than alive. Marshall didn't need her to finish the sentence. He drove home with a clear understanding of what he was facing. His wife wasn't just having an affair or even just enabling a predator. She was actively planning their daughter's death for insurance money, and she was using Nash's attraction to children to help her do it. Marshall spent the next week planning with military precision. He moved Lana to Delia's house permanently, telling Hollis it was temporary while he dealt with a family emergency in Macon. Hollis seemed unconcerned about their daughter's absence. With Benny's help, he installed professional-grade surveillance throughout the house. Motion sensors, audio recording, hidden cameras with battery backup that couldn't be disabled by cutting the Wi-Fi. Everything transmitted to a secure server off-site. The final piece was the bait. Marshall planted a journal in Lana's room, written in crayon to look like a 6-year-old's handwriting. Today, Mr. Nash came over again. He wanted to play the secret game, but I said no. He got mad that I told Daddy about Mr. Nash. Daddy said he's going to tell the police tomorrow. I'm scared. Then Marshall told Hollis he was taking a job in Alabama, a big restoration project that would keep him away for 3 days. He made sure Nash overheard the conversation when he called the house. 3 whole days. Hollis had said, "That's a long time. Good money. We could use it for Lana's medical bills." After Marshall hung up, he drove to a motel 20 miles away and waited. The surveillance cameras activated at 2:17 p.m. the next day. Nash's car pulled into their driveway, and he entered the house using his own key. Marshall watched from his laptop as Nash went straight to Lana's room. He found a journal within minutes. Marshall watched Nash's face change as he read the crayon writing. Panic, anger, then calculation. Nash pulled out his phone and called someone. The audio was crystal clear. "We have a problem." The kid talked. Hollis's voice came through the phone speaker. "What do you mean talked?" "She told Marshall about our visits. He's going to the police tomorrow." "Damn it, Nash. You said this was under control." She wasn't supposed to say anything. Kids this age usually don't. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Hollis spoke again, her voice cold. "We move up the timeline. Tonight. Are you sure? The insurance policy is active. How about the medical records showing her condition? If something happens to her tonight, an accident, a seizure in the bathtub, it'll look natural." Marshall's hands shook as he recorded every word. "What about Marshall?" Nash asked. "He's 3 hours away. By the time he gets back, it'll be over. I'll be the grieving mother who lost her sick little girl. And the money, we split like we planned. 200,000 each. Enough to start over somewhere else." Nash was quiet for a moment. "What if she fights?" "She won't. Not if you give her the right dose first." "I don't like this, Hollis. Killing a kid. You like touching her well enough. And you've been taking my money for months. You're in this as deep as I am." Marshall heard Nash sigh through the phone. "Fine, but we do this clean. No evidence. There won't be any. Lana's staying at Delia's tonight, remember? We'll pick her up for a special surprise. By morning, it'll all be over." The call ended. Marshall watched Nash pocket the journal and leave the house at 6:30 p.m. Hollis called Delia's number. "Hey, it's me. I'm coming to pick up Lana for the night. I miss her." Delia, who had been coached on what to say, played her part perfectly. "She's having dinner. Can you give me an hour?" "Sure. We'll be there around 8. Marshall caught that. Nash would be coming too. Marshall called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation from his motel room. Then he called the local police. Then he called the FBI field office in Atlanta at by 7 p.m. There were 16 law enforcement officers positioned around Delia's house and the road leading to IT at 8:03 p.m. Nash's car pulled into Delia's driveway. Both Nash and Hollis got out, walking toward the front door like they were picking up a child for ice cream. They never made it to the porch. Marshall sat in the GBI field office in Macon, watching through one-way glass as agents questioned his wife. Hollis had been crying for 3 hours, playing the role of confused victim. "I don't understand what you think I've done," she sobbed to Agent Patricia Williams. "I was just picking up my daughter, with a syringe full of ketamine in your purse." Hollis's face went pale. "I don't know how that got there." Agent Williams placed a photo on the table. Nash being arrested with a medical bag containing enough sedatives to kill a horse. "Your boyfriend says you gave him the drugs. Says you planned the whole thing." Nash is lying. He's trying to save himself. But Marshall knew they had more than Nash's confession. The surveillance footage from the house showed everything. The audio recordings captured their plan in detail. The financial records proved the money trail. Benny had also traced Nash's background further. 3 different states for different hospitals, always leaving quietly after budget cuts or restructuring. Always right after complaints about inappropriate behavior with children. "Your sister was right about you," Agent Williams said, consulting her notes. "Marla told us about your pattern of faking illnesses for attention. She says you've been planning something like this for years." Marshall had driven to Marla's apartment the night before the arrests. She'd been horrified but not surprised when he explained Hollis's plan. "I knew she was sick, but I never thought." Marla had shaken her head. "I should have said something years ago. You're saying it now. That's what matters." Marla had agreed to testify about Hollis's psychological patterns, about the fake illnesses, about the insurance questions from years earlier. Through the glass, Marshall watched his wife's mask finally slip. When Agent Williams showed her the journal they'd planted, the one Nash had taken as evidence of Lana's confession, Hollis exploded. That little brat. I gave her everything. A home, a family, and she was going to ruin it all by telling her father that Nash was molesting her. Nash wasn't molesting her. He was just preparing her for what had to happen. Agent Williams leaned forward. And what had to happen? She had to die. Hollis's voice was flat, emotionless. The insurance money was our way out. Away from this boring little town, away from Marshall and his stupid garage. So you decided to kill your 6-year-old daughter for money. She wasn't really mine anyway. She looks just like Marshall. Acts like him, too stubborn, asking too many questions. Hollis wiped her nose with the back of her hand. I never wanted kids. Marshall pushed for it. Said it would be good for us. Marshall had heard enough. He left the observation room and walked outside, needing air. Delia found him in the parking lot, smoking a cigarette he'd bummed from one of the agents. How are you holding up? I keep thinking about all the signs I missed. All the times I should have known. You couldn't have known she was planning murder. Marshall. Normal people don't think that way. But Marshall couldn't shake the feeling that he'd failed. As a husband, as a father, as the one person who was supposed to protect Lana from exactly this kind of evil. Where is she now? Lana? Safe. Playing with my neighbor's kids like none of this ever happened. Delia sat on the hood of his truck. She's going to be okay. Kids are tougher than we think. Marshall hoped his sister was right. Marshall didn't wait for the legal system to move slowly. While Hollis and Nash sat in jail awaiting trial, he took action. First, he leaked the surveillance footage to Channel 11 News in Atlanta. The reporter, Sarah Kim, had covered child exploitation cases before and understood the significance of what she was seeing. This is one of the most disturbing cases I've ever encountered, she said during her evening broadcast. A mother and her lover planning to murder a 6-year-old girl for insurance money, using sexual abuse as part of their scheme. The story went viral within hours. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. By morning, reporters were camped outside the Brandon Falls Police Department and the urgent care center where Nash had worked. Marshall also sent copies of everything to Nash's employer. The medical director called him personally. Mr. Beckett, I want you to know that Nash Redmond has been terminated immediately. We're conducting a full review of his time here and cooperating completely with law enforcement. What about the other children he might have hurt? We're reaching out to every family whose children he had contact with. This won't happen again. But Marshall knew it would happen again, somewhere else with someone else. Predators like Nash always found new hunting grounds. The Georgia Nursing Board revoked Nash's license within a week. The story had generated so much public pressure that they had no choice but to act quickly. Marshall also hired the best family attorney in the state, a woman named Rebecca Torres who specialized in custody cases involving abuse. This should be straightforward, she told him during their first meeting. Your wife planned to murder your child. No family court judge in Georgia will give her custody. I want more than that. I want her parental rights completely terminated. That's harder. Usually requires a pattern of abuse or abandonment. Marshall handed her a thick folder. Insurance fraud, child endangerment, conspiracy to commit murder, enabling sexual abuse. How's that for a pattern? Rebecca looked through the documents, her eyebrows rising. This should do it. The DA's office moved quickly too. District Attorney James Morrison was up for re-election and understood the political value of prosecuting a case that had captured national attention. We're seeking the maximum penalties for both defendants, he announced at a press conference. The attempted murder of a child for financial gain represents the worst kind of depravity. Nash's lawyer tried to make a deal cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. But the evidence was so overwhelming that Morrison rejected any plea bargains. They planned to kill a 6-year-old girl, he told Marshall. They don't get to negotiate their way out of consequences. Marshall was glad to hear it. He'd had enough of people escaping justice. The trial began 6 months later in the Macon County Courthouse. Marshall had been dreading it, but he knew Lana needed to see that the system could work, that bad people faced consequences for their actions. That Hollis's lawyer, a slick defense attorney from Atlanta named Richard Cross, tried every angle he could think of. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said during opening statements, "My client is not a monster. She's a woman who fell under the influence of a manipulative predator who convinced her to do terrible things." But the evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance footage played in court showed Hollis planning every detail. The audio recordings captured her voice discussing the murder with cold calculation. The financial records proved she'd been preparing for months. Nash's defense was even weaker. His lawyer claimed he'd never intended to hurt Lana, that he was only going along with Hollis's plan to protect the child. Protect her by sedating her and drowning her in the bathtub? Prosecutor Janet Lee asked during cross-examination. Nash had no answer for that. The most damaging testimony came from Dr. Rebecca Patel, the neurologist who'd been treating Lana for fake symptoms. Mrs. Beckett described severe neurological problems that simply didn't exist, Dr. Patel testified. When I asked to examine the child directly, Mrs. Beckett always found excuses to postpone. Now I understand why. Delia testified about the financial evidence, walking the jury through the timeline of the insurance policy, the secret bank account, the fake medical bills. Marla testified about Hollis's psychological patterns, her history of faking illnesses for attention, her questions about insuring children. "My sister has always been manipulative," Marla said, "but I never thought she'd hurt child. I blame myself for not speaking up sooner." The defense tried to paint Marshall as a controlling husband who drove his wife to desperation. Cross brought up Marshall's military service, suggesting that PTSD had made him paranoid and abusive. "Mr. Beckett, isn't it true that you suffered severe psychological trauma during your deployment to Iraq?" "Yes. And isn't it true that this trauma made you suspicious of everyone around you?" "It made me careful." "That's different. Careful enough to spy on your own wife. Careful enough to protect my daughter from people who wanted to hurt her." Cross pushed harder. "You installed hidden cameras in your own home without your wife's knowledge. You tracked her movements, monitored her phone calls, investigated her financial records. That sounds like stalking, not protection." Marshall looked directly at the jury. "My daughter told me she was scared of a man who was asking her inappropriate questions and touching her. My wife was enabling that man's access to my child while planning to kill her for insurance money. I did what any father would do." The jury seemed to agree. After 4 days of testimony, they deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts for both defendants. Nash received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, child sexual abuse, and drug trafficking. He'd be eligible for parole in 15 years, when he was 57. Hollis received life without parole for attempted murder and insurance fraud. The judge, Helen Morrison, was particularly harsh during sentencing. "You planned to kill your own child for money," she said. "You enabled a predator's access to that child. You showed no remorse, no maternal instinct, no basic human decency. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, and our community will be safer for it." Marshall felt no satisfaction watching his wife led away in shackles. Only relief that it was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to interview him. He pushed past them without speaking, focusing only on getting back to Lana Point 6 months later. Marshall and Lana lived in a small house in Macon, 3 blocks from Delia's place. Marshall had sold the auto shop in Brandon Falls and opened a new one near downtown Macon. The change of scenery was good for both of them. Lana was seeing a therapist twice a week, a kind woman named Dr. Angela Foster, who specialized in childhood trauma. The session seemed to help Lana, slept better now, smiled more often, had stopped wetting the bed. The important thing, Dr. Foster had told Marshall, is that Lana knows she's safe, that she can trust you to protect her. Children are remarkably resilient when they feel secure. On this particular evening, Marshall was teaching Lana how to change a tire in the driveway of their new home. She knelt beside him as he showed her how to position the jack, her small hands eager to help. "Why do I need to know this, Daddy?" "Because someday you might be driving alone and get flat tire. I want you to be able to take care of yourself. But you'll always be there to help me, right?" Marshall tightened the last lug nut and looked at his daughter. At 6 years old, she was already showing signs of the strong woman she'd become: independent, curious, unafraid to ask hard questions. "I'll always be there when you need me." But part of being a good father is teaching you to be strong on your own too. They finished the tire change and went inside for dinner. Lana helped him make grilled cheese sandwiches, standing on a step stool to reach the stove. They ate at the small kitchen table, talking about her day at school, her new friends, the book she was reading. After dinner, they walked to the backyard where they'd planted an oak tree the week before. It was small now, barely 3 feet tall, but the roots were already taking hold. How long before it gets big? Lana asked. Years. Maybe decades. But it'll be strong. Oak trees live for hundreds of years. Will we still live here when I'm old? We'll live wherever makes you happy and keeps you safe. That night, Marshall read Lana 2 chapters from her favorite book before tucking her into bed. She decorated her new room with drawings from school and photos of the 2 of them together at the beach, at the zoo, working in the garage. Daddy, yes, sweetheart, am I safe now? It was a question she asked sometimes, usually at bedtime when the darkness made her think about scary things. Marshall always gave her the same answer. Forever and always. Nobody will ever hurt you again. Promise? I promise. Lana smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Marshall stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. He thought about Hollis sometimes, wondered if she ever regretted what she'd done. Probably not. Dr. Foster had explained that people like Hollis narcissists with sociopathic tendencies rarely felt genuine remorse. She buried her own humanity, Dr. Foster had said. But she couldn't bury yours or Lana's. Outside, the wind moved through the oak tree they'd planted, rustling its young leaves. It would grow strong here, Marshall thought. Deep roots, straight trunk, branches reaching toward the light. Just like his daughter, he turned off Lana's light and headed to his own room, finally at peace. The nightmares from Iraq had stopped coming. The hypervigilance that had saved his life overseas and his daughter's life at home was finally allowing him to rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Lana would grow up, ask harder questions, face problems he couldn't solve for her. But tonight, she was safe and loved and dreaming of good things. That was enough. That was everything.